Hey gang, Professor Feezer here, and on today's episode of Code with Feezer, we're going to take a look at what it takes to get started programming with Python. So that's going to include downloading and installing Python and actually writing and running our first script. Now I'm going to demo all these steps on a Windows operating system. If you're working from a Mac OS, I promise to post a video soon showing how the steps are different. However, if you want to follow along, I promise the steps aren't so different that you won't be able to keep up. Here we are at python.org, which is where you want to point your browser when you're getting ready to get started with Python. It's pretty straightforward. We want to click on Downloads, sort of in the top middle of the screen. So Downloads, and we're going for a Windows install. There you can see the Mac or other platforms, if that would apply to you. The download should be automatically selected for you. For most folks, it's going to end in AMD 64. And that's okay even if you have an Intel machine or might be concerned about what was downloaded. Now, all I did was actually execute what was downloaded. If you need to go into that directory and select it, so be it. Install now. You can assume all of the defaults are probably going to be all right for you. This video is installing Python 3.12. A new release will come out about every 6 months, every 8 months or so. Don't be too concerned if the version is a little bit different. Here we've finished, and the only thing we might want to consider is this disable path length limit. If you click that, effectively it's going to make Python more accessible. Max path is a limitation. It's an environmental variable that controls how long a pointer can be. If we turn that off, should the installation of Python be in a rather obscure location, an obscure path, it'll still allow us to have a shortcut, like the word Python, still point to the actual executable Python, wherever it is. I'm going to click it. That one's really up to you if you want to click it or not. Setup was successful. I'm going to click Close. And at this point, Python is now installed. So there is a live interpreter included with Python, but that's not good for preserving code that we've written. So I'm going to go out to Notepad++. You can actually just search for it. And you'll find here up at the top, notepad-plus-plus.org. This is a standard tool that coders often use on their local machines. So we would use this as opposed to something like Visual Studios. It's more minimalistic. Something like Microsoft Word just isn't suitable for coding. So if you come over to this platform, you can download it. I already have this installed, so I'm not going to reinstall it. We can actually use it then to write our first script. So just down at the start line, you can go ahead and search for Notepad++ and open an instance of that. When we open up Notepad++ for the first time, you'll see a new one. This is just like a normal Notepad document. There's nothing special about it. So the first thing we're going to do is select language, come down to P for Python, and select Python from the choice menu. The next thing we're going to do is on the first line, type out our shebang. Shebang may be written two ways. You might see user bin env Python 3. You might see Python. You might just see user bin Python, user bin Python 3. All of these are acceptable. It's actually a nod to Linux systems. Windows systems use file extensions to identify what the file type is. So when we save our program, we'll save it with a .py extension, Python. Windows will say, okay, that's a Python file. Linux doesn't have that. The shebang up at the top is the only thing that tells our Linux systems this is going to be a Python program that's going to run. Now on the next two lines, we're going to build a thing called a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is made with either one single tick or two double ticks. Either one's going to work. So code with feezer RZ feezer, a simple Python script, is just metadata. It's providing some information about the code that will run. Def main is the beginning of a function. Although we're not going to talk deeply about functions right now, all code should always be run or live nested inside of a function. The word def stands for define. Main is the name of the function. When a line ends in a colon, it signifies that the next line should be indented, either one or many times, or at least one space, maybe many spaces. Here I chose 4. You just have to be consistent. So 4 is the number of spaces I'm going to use to indent. And the first line is actually supposed to be a multi-line string. It's supposed to describe what the function does. That's best practice. In this case, the main function exists in almost every program. It will call additional functions. So just to say runtime is probably enough. We don't have to be more exotic than that. I'm then going to call on a built-in function called print, which pushes stuff to standard out. So learning Python via code with feezer is a string. It's a string because it's surrounded in quotes that I want to push out to standard out. Display to the screen, that's a comment. Coming after that hash sign means it's a comment. This next one is going to still print to the screen, but you'll notice that it's not a print, it's an input. And the comment there pretty well describes why we're using it. Input is to collect input from a user. Typically, you would say something like X is equal to input, and then whatever somebody typed in, they'd hit enter, and it would be assigned to X. If we don't use assignment, if we just say input, press enter to continue, it's just going to pause our program. And the reason that is so critical is because Windows, when it runs our script, will start our script and then close it right away. The input is actually what forces it to stay open for long enough for us to see the results. I'm then just going to call the main function. Just because we created a main function doesn't mean we're actually calling it. Here is where we've actually called the main function. So it's a little complex what we've done here. If name equals main, call main. This is a conditional that is okay to use regardless of situations. Any situation you find yourself in where you're trying to call main, it's appropriate to use this. We'll explore it in a future video. For right now, let's just say it's best practice. We're done coding, so we just need to save and run our script. I'm going to call it code with feezer.py and hit save. I can now run the script simply by double-clicking on it. There's the program that we just wrote, code with feezer. If I double-click on it, it should run. There's our program, learning Python via code with feezer. Press enter to continue. There is so much we can do with Python beyond pushing to standard out. Maybe we write a client that scrapes some price data from several websites and writes it to a database. Maybe it's a client that makes an API call and purchases a product. Maybe it's the server that runs the APIs that accepts the purchase order. We could write the client side or the server side, the web framework side. Python is even often behind many of the AI projects that you're hearing so much about these days. So more to come in future videos. I hope you learned a lot. If you did, be sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time on an episode of Code with Feezer.